So we're working with this week connection and safety at work and at home or wherever it is that we're thinking about whatever situations that we have. We all have experience with this, and we have perhaps situations in our life right now where there are people that are hard for us to feel safe around, and where there's some dynamics. Anytime there's a group of people, there are dynamics that are making it difficult. And what I'm also finding is that as we're starting to move out into more activity with COVID, what's happening with COVID right now is that many people are really towards the end of their rope. And so our nervous systems are struggling more. We're not as regulated as we might have been a few years ago, even though that wasn't ideal usually either. But it's a little bit harder for us to kind of be safe for ourselves and each other and to really notice what's going on. So, the kind of work that we do around grounding and orienting and breathing, working with the thoughts in our mind is so essential and so helpful. So, safety is an absence of danger and we feel connected. That's a quote from Dr. Stephen Porges, the Polyvagal Institute. I think that's really important because we can protect ourselves from bullies or other people who are difficult to be around by just never going near them. And that's also not really ideal for us because then we end up really isolated. And as human beings, we need connection with other people too. So we really have to work with both of these facets. One of the things we know is that someone who's in a fight response can be scary to be around. Sometimes people will lash out. We've talked about emotional flooding before, where we feel like there's something really threatening and we get this rush of adrenaline and cortisol. We might say things that are mean. Some people don't really ever have much of a fight response, or it takes a lot to get them to that point. But most of us have been around, or probably all of us have been around someone who that's happening to. They just kind of lose it. And some people don't seem to feel like that's a problem for them, that they feel pretty entitled, especially if they have a more powerful position in a workplace or in a family. And they might not really even be concerned about that. It's just like, this is how I feel. This is what I'm saying. If you don't like it, too bad. Let's pause here for a moment and bring to mind. We probably don't even have to bring it to mind. There's probably things coming to mind about different situations we've been in. And when someone who has power over you, so certainly when we were children, a lot of people had power over us, including our parents or caregivers. In work situations, that's often the case. Ongoing family situations, there's often a power imbalance because of age or status or money or just the dynamics in the family. So when you think about that and bring it to mind, someone who has more power than you gets angry at you. What does that feel like inside? And as you're paying attention to that, also notice that right now there's nothing scary happening. We're doing an inquiry. You could notice your feet on the floor. You could look around the room. Notice that you're safe where you are. Sometimes I'll notice kind of a butterflies in the stomach or a feeling of anxiety somehow in the body. Oftentimes we're noticing sensations. Are you afraid of their anger? Well, this is something that makes sense. People who are angry and not able to be emotionally regulated are more dangerous to us than someone who's in a freeze response or someone who is well regulated, even though they're angry. As we move through the practice today, it's very important, especially when we're working with anger, to stay well regulated. So stay in this room, in this moment. We're doing an inquiry. You could hold your own hands. You could do box breathing. Let's move on now to, are you afraid of feeling or expressing your own anger? So, especially when someone has power over us, we often are not able to express anger back, or we feel like we can't. So, when somebody is saying something or giving you that look of contempt, or they're trying to make you look like a fool in a meeting, if it's a family situation, there's all of those predictable dynamics. What happens inside of you when you think about that or you bring that forward? Are you afraid of your anger? What's your history with that? And if you ever let yourself get angry, or if you ever let it out, what does that feel like? I feel like, whoa, that's not a good idea. I can't afford to do that. Or maybe it's, I've done that a lot, and every time I do, it's a disaster. I don't want to do that anymore. Ideally, we're well regulated and we can notice, yes, I'm angry. This is what I'm angry about. I can stay regulated enough to share in a respectful way, but firm. I mean, that's something that's not accessible to us all of the time. What's your history with this? Let's take another minute to reflect on that and take a few breaths. Make sure that you're stable here in this moment. And that's a big question. I have several inquiries on my YouTube channel about this. What happens if I feel it, and what happens if I let it out? So, as we're going through the inquiry practice, we're going to go through it as if we are the one who's being targeted by a bully. It could be something that is really intense for you, something that's happening right now. It could be something that is a little bit more in your past. But I wanted to bring this in too, just to acknowledge when we're in the vicinity of someone who is being targeted by a bully, we experience that as a threat too. So we are afraid, or we're aware that there's a cost for standing up, being an upstander, not a bystander. There's been a lot of education on this over the last 10 years or so. And we have feelings about this. The bully will often turn on us if we do speak up. So we're aware that there's a cost for that. And if we're working with a high stakes situation like family or close friendship groups or work, we're going to have to take the consequences of whatever it is that we decide to do. So first of all, when you're kind of starting to work with this, really notice, where are you on that ladder, the polyvagal ladder? Are you in a state of freeze? If you're hardly breathing at all, take a few deeper breaths. If we're in a meeting when this happens, we could remember to do some practices like look around the room. You'd have to do this silently if you're in a meeting, but you look around the room and name 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch. So we can regulate ourselves back into feeling more stable, even when these things are happening. Most of us would want to get away from it. And also, we often feel outraged for the person who's being targeted, or at least we feel some sympathy for them. The part where I'm guiding you through, we're going to work with it as though we're the target. This is something that you also might want to work with it as well, or instead. Okay, dress rehearsal. One thing we know about people in a group is that they're predictable. So if you were to talk with a friend or another family member or a colleague about the situation at work, the person at work, we all know who these people are. We know who is going to lose it. We know who is going to be the bully. We recognize them, we know it in our nervous system. And what we also know is that when someone has done that before, they're more likely to do it again. And that may or may not be true, but our nervous system believes it's true because our nervous system is always monitoring who's safe to be around and who's not. So, this way of looking at it, this somatic mindfulness inquiry, really requires that we're in our body and in this moment in order to do this without being re traumatizing. So, when we think about catastrophic thinking, we might also be going, well, what's going to happen here? What's going to be said? What could I do? oh my gosh, what if they do that? Then I could. So this isn't exactly the same as that because we're staying stable here in this moment as we're doing the inquiry. So anger in the workplace always feels like a threat. Anger anywhere feels like a threat. And someone who feels like they're out of control, our bodies, our nervous systems respond to that very predictably. We don't want to be around them. We want to figure out a way to deal with this more effectively. So as we're doing the inquiry and you're thinking about something, let's use an example of something where we're the target of somebody. So if that's happened to you in the past, the distant past, you might be feeling a little bit more regulated about it. But especially if it's something, a family or a workplace that's current and ongoing, we're always kind of positioning ourselves here. So, what's your history with this person? So, choose somebody that's maybe not a 10 out of 10, but a situation or a person that has some juice in it so that you could do an inquiry. And what's your history with this person, with their anger? Is this something that's kind of once in a while? Is it a regular occurrence? Is it a big blow up? Is it kind of that more simmering under the surface? What's your history with this particular person? And as we're looking at that, what does it feel like in your body? Does it feel like you're going into a fight, flight, or freeze response? We're going to pause a lot in this so that we can come back into, okay, I can feel my feet on the floor again. I can do the box breathing, but bring it to mind so we have something to work with. And before we go into the next step, let's just soften your body, let your shoulders release, look around the room that you're in right now for cues of safety. And then visualize the room, the people, the situation just before whatever it is you're working with, just before the altercation began. So if we're using a work example, you might have been sitting in a Zoom room, you might have been sitting in a room physically with other people. And if you could see yourself in that picture, what would you notice? Were you bored? Were you engaged? Did you sense that trouble was coming? Oftentimes we can really predict, okay, that person's going to be here, or this is the topic we're going to talk about, or I need to have that difficult conversation with my sibling. Oftentimes we can predict what might happen. And what was your posture? Are you seated? Do you look relaxed? Do you look tense? And this tool of looking not out of our own eyes, but looking at ourselves in the situation is also one of the main ways that we keep our awareness that we're not in the situation. We're witnessing, we're visualizing, we're not actually there right now. And that helps our nervous system to calm a bit too. And even just bringing it to mind can cause a response, of course. So notice if you started holding your breath, if you brought your shoulders up around your ears. It might not be obvious, but just notice that. So let's take a moment here. Look at the image that you have. You could tap on your forehead, a couple of fingers on your forehead. Just bring your attention to the sound and the sensation of the tapping on your forehead. Notice your feet, your seat. And then when you're regulated again, let's go to the next step. If you're imagining something that might happen in a meeting, their voice is getting louder. And as somebody starts to get more into that anger phase, everybody starts to shift away. So they start to look away. Something's going on that people are feeling uncomfortable about, even though people might not be talking about it. Everybody's aware of it and reacting to it somehow. So in this situation, and this might not have been your situation, so you might use whatever was your situation. It might have been a look, it might have not have been this obvious, or it might be that you're bringing forward a situation that somebody else was in, but you were there for it. So the person stands up, they're pointing their finger, their voice is getting harder. Let's take some time here, stay regulated. tapping, hold your own hands. What was it about it that felt so threatening? Was it the content of the words or was it the tone of their voice? We don't have to have somebody say something really specific for us to get the message. When someone looks at us with that look of contempt, or when they kind of make fun of us somehow, we get the message. So notice what it is. Is it a sound? Is it a look? And keep yourself looking at the whole situation. So you're not looking out of your own eyes, you're looking at the whole situation. And now bring this visual into a frame. If it's words, if it's the content of the words, how could you be so stupid to do that or something? Put those words into a box, into a frame, as though you're looking at them printed out. And you can do this with your eyes open. Put the frame on the other side of the room. Imagine those words or that person's face in that frame. And then notice the space on the outside of the frame. There's space on the outside of the frame, and take your eyes around that empty space. So start at the top, go in one direction around, a couple of times in each direction. Deep breaths. Let your body settle. And depending on how activated you are, you might stand up and shake it out. You might do some shadow boxing. You might take a break if you're feeling really emotionally flooded. So we're looking at that image. You could do some tapping on your forehead as well. We're looking at an image or we're working with sounds. Maybe you can hear their voice. This is something that was very difficult for us. We were in a situation of either watching and witnessing or being targeted ourselves. And we are also remaining aware that right now we're safe. We keep coming back to this regulation. So here you are in the meeting. The boss finishes yelling, and what do you do next? And in this case, what we're doing is a visualization. So we're not saying this is the right thing to do. One of the things that I think is really helpful to do when we're in any kind of a situation like this is to do this ahead of time, which we're doing now. We do it ahead of time so that we can kind of flush out what is it that the situation, what's actually going on here? How do I feel? What is it that's threatening for me? And where are you in this process? So if you're being made to feel stupid in a meeting, if somebody's diminishing you, and this has happened before and you're ready for it, then let's practice what you might say in a meeting. So you might also stand up, especially if they're standing above you, kind of that power position. You might also stand up, take a deep breath, look at them in the eye, which is also something that may or may not be the right thing to do. But if it is, you could imagine that you're doing that. And what might you say? These are just a couple of examples. Sometimes when we're talked about or talked to in that way, we've already addressed it. You might say something like, we spoke about this already. You need to stop yelling at me. I'm not going to listen to you. Can you stop yelling at me? Can you say this in a calmer voice? What is it you want me to tell you? What is it you want to know? So saying something like that to someone who's intimidating us is really hard. So we're not saying that this is right or wrong, and certainly we're not going to have a free ride on this. These things are hard to do. So notice your body, notice your breath. And in your particular situation, what might you do or say? And then bring yourself into that really vivid visualization. So whether or not you'd actually do it doesn't really matter. Just what is it you might do? You might stand up and say, I'm not going to sit here while you yell at me. And then I just turn around and leave. Or if it's on the phone, you might hang it up. If it's on a Zoom call, you might disconnect. So feel yourself stepping in and saying something directly. say something directly about it. And as you're doing that in your mind, notice what's coming up in your body. There might be a feeling of shame. Well, I haven't ever actually done this. I don't think it would be safe for me to do that. I would be fired. Or, no, I'm too scared to do that. There could be all kinds of different things coming up. So, as we work with these and come back to them and work with them again and again, we might notice there's a lot of things like that that we could work with. So, if you're feeling shame, you could do some work around that. If you're feeling like a victim, like this always happens, why does this always happen to me? You could kind of pause that and put those words into a frame and do some tapping on your forehead. Notice what's here. There's no right or wrong way to deal with these things. And we're in a corner. There's not really a good way to deal with it. There are going to be consequences no matter what we do. Take a few breaths. Notice where you are on the fight, flight, or freeze. And if you want to stand up, shake it out, that would be a good thing to do. You could bring your hands into fists above your head, arms up, and then throw the energy down into the ground. Open your hands. Do several strong, gusty exhales. Make some noise. We're getting this out of our body. We're self regulating as we go through this. So let's come out of the inquiry now and just kind of come back into the body. Notice what it is that you learned or that you experienced just now going through that. There's a lot of things that we can do in the future. We can learn about bullying, we can talk to other colleagues, we can talk to family members if it's happening in a family. We can set boundaries with people that are a little bit easier to set than a standing up and leaving a meeting kind of a boundary. We can do a lot of things that are kind of gradual. So we one of the things that we would first do is notice, okay, I'm actually in this situation. There is a danger here to me or somebody else that I care about is in the situation. What might I do? What am I strong enough to do? What have I got enough power to do? When we don't address these things, we end up with a consequence. Often there's a consequence in the stress in our body. It might be a consequence of we just kind of go into freeze and we're not very good at work because we're often just kind of in that mode of I'm kind of scared what's going to happen. And when we're shut down like that, nobody's very productive. So, what is it that comes to mind right now? We'll give this a couple of minutes. So, breathe. Notice that you're here in your seat. I had many years when I was a single parent and I was waitressing, and there were a lot of situations that were really abusive and tough, and I couldn't get out of them until I got another job. So, I know what it feels like to be stuck like this, or in a family where if we actually say and address what's going on, maybe that bully is going to kick us out of the family. We're not going to be able to be part of that anymore. So we're not at all pretending that this is easy or that there's a right or wrong way to do it. Sometimes the best thing is to do nothing, but it's our internal experience with it. Can I just look at the situation, decide, okay, in this situation, my best option is to regulate my breath, breathe, just stay present to myself and be kind. I'm not going to say anything. It's not worth it. We have a wide range of possibilities. And let's take a moment to just offer ourselves some compassion. Making a mistake, even if somebody is giving us a hard time and we did make a mistake, it doesn't make me a mistake. I'm an adult. I can protect myself. One of the ways is to really notice the truth of the situation. I'm not unworthy. I'm not a failure just because someone thinks I am. This isn't personal. Usually when somebody's a bully, it has way more to do with them than it does to do with us. And we could bring our hand to our heart. We could stand strong. We could care for ourselves. We could be on our own side. Take a moment to notice that. I am firmly on my own side. Sometimes I have to be in these difficult situations, and I can take care of myself in all kinds of different ways. And one of the most foundational is that I don't turn against myself. I see it clearly. I remember that I love myself, that I'm a human being, that I have a hard time just like everybody else, and that I can really cultivate that love and compassion for myself. Notice your whole body again, soften through your back. Let yourself take some deeper breaths. And then finish the inquiry for now.